The Belmont Stakes, the third jewel in the American Triple Crown, was on Saturday afternoon, race number 11 at Belmont, a mile and a half on the main track. You had 10 3-year-olds signed on. Post-time favorite was Tacitus at 9-5. He took a lot of money in a spot like this, but to be honest, I looked at this race and thought that he and War of Will, the winner of the Preakness three weeks earlier, I thought they were going to be heavy favorites. I suppose late in the wagering, some of the numbers ended up changing a little bit, and they did end up being prohibitive favorites, but I really figured they'd be in that 6-5, 9-5 range combined. Instead, they were both playable prices if you liked them. And I happen to like one of them. I actually like both of them. I thought they were going to just completely lay over this field. We'll touch on some of the circumstantial things that could potentially have led to certain different results, but when it's all said and done, Mark Casse wins the Belmont Stakes, but not with the horse that I thought he would, and many thought he would. Here's the stretch run of this year's Belmont.
And it is Jovia and Tex. Sir Winston comes up on the outside, and he got in front of War of Will. And Sir Winston has moved to the center of the track under Joel Rosario to take the lead. On the inside, Jovia fights on. Tacitus is there, and then Tex between horses. Master Fencer on the far outside. They're coming to the finish, and Sir Winston has won the Belmont Stakes.
Sir Winston gets the job done at odds of 10-1. He finishes first over Tacitus, who is the runner-up by a length at odds of 9-5. And Jovia, the pace setter, hangs on to finish third at odds of 21-1. Let's look at the winner, the Belmont Stakes winner for 2019, Sir Winston. 3 of 10 lifetime, 5 times in the money, over $961,000 in career earnings, owned and bred by Tracy Farmer in Kentucky. That's where the horse was bred. Trained by Mark Casse, ridden to victory by Joel Rosario, and you can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He is by Awesome again out of an Affleet Alex mare named La Grande Bailadora. And I really thought this would be a horse that we would need to see a surface switch before we saw his best, because he had that late running style. His dam did so much good work on a synthetic surface. Well, guess what? You prevail. You got a relatively lightly raced 3-year-old, and you think maybe the best is yet to come? Well, here you go. You've got it. You win a grade 1. This horse is made now as a stallion going forward. 95 buyer, 119 pace adjusted and raw Timeform US rating for Sir Winston. So these were legitimate figures earned on both sides. We know that the Belmont, from a buyer standpoint, it's very rarely going to be a spectacular number, just because it's just an oddly run race and things of that nature. Now, I had harped on, leading into the race, that the running style for the Belmont, you need to be relatively close. You need to be forwardly placed. The interior splits, the mile and the mile and a quarter call from Timeform US were color-coded red, meaning they felt the interior splits of the race, the pace heated up. Joel Rosario did 2 things. He was down on the inside, which is, at this point, unless you've been living under a rock and you didn't pay attention to any of the racing Friday or Saturday at Belmont, and to be honest, I didn't look at anything on Sunday, so who knows if that continued on, that trend. But the inside is where you wanted to be. Friday, it felt like, well, maybe it's speed. Inside certainly doesn't hurt. Speed is inherently good when inside is good, because you can clear off and get over to the rail. So I think sometimes that speed bias talk maybe is a little bit premature. And I've made it clear, I'm usually one of those folks that is probably one of the last ones in line to come around to the idea of a bias. I think it was pretty undoubted that inside is where you wanted to be all day on the main track on Belmont Stakes Saturday. Sir Winston was down there. Joel Rosario, about going into the far turn, he started to warm this horse up, get him into the run. So really, when you look at it from that standpoint, you could even make a case that this was an even bigger effort than it looks at face value for Sir Winston, because he made that move into the teeth of the pace, and rounding the far turn, he is just loaded in behind horses. All Rosario needs to do is tip him out into the clear, and he goes on with it past the tiring pace setters. This is a nice effort from this horse. I don't know where he stacks up now going forward, because his 2 best races have come at Belmont Park. He still is a closer. He's a horse that doesn't have a ton of early speed, and that concerns me on the main track, unless you get a pace meltdown, or you get an instance where perhaps the track was in your favor and you get a heady ride like Rosario gave him. I'm going to be curious to see going forward what Sir Winston turns into. I don't want to take anything away from him here, but I do think we have to acknowledge that he was on the best part of the racetrack. He got a beautiful ride from Joel Rosario. Great training job by Mark Casse. Look, to win 2/3 of the Triple Crown with 2 different horses, I think most people coming into the Belmont and exiting it expected Belmont to do that. Win 2/3 of the Triple Crown with 2 different horses. Well, instead, Casse does it. It's going to be one of those things that I'm going to be curious to see going forward, where all these horses show up, in what position, and from a running style standpoint. A horse like Sir Winston is still going to be one of those that is really at the mercy of pace and trip unless he finds some early speed. Didn't need it here on Saturday. This was a nice effort from him, taking advantage of some circumstances. Now, Tacitus. We need to touch on the idea that he only loses by a length. If you believe the inside's where you wanted to be, where I think that's the sort of prevailing wisdom at this point, certainly against Tacitus because he was 4 or 5 wide throughout. Then you factor in the sort of gold rail situation. Okay, he's completely on the opposite end of that. He traveled 65 more feet according to Trackus than Sir Winston did on any other day. I mean, 65 feet, we're talking lengths difference as opposed to the one length loss here, margin. So Tacitus, you can look at it and say he was a little bit unlucky. I'm looking at it still and saying, you know what, you look at him on that far turn, there's a moment where he's in 8th. And I don't think it's anything that Jose Ortiz did wrong. I don't know that this horse is totally there yet. Here, for those of you listening, tapping on my forehead, on my temple there. I don't think he's got the mind yet. I just don't. He's a son of Tappet. He may end up proving out to be the best of all these 3-year-olds. I still don't think mentally he is all there. I just don't think he's a finished project yet, which is an encouraging piece going forward. But we're going to get to a certain point where I want to stop saying that. I want to get to a point where I say, yeah, he's finally put it together. He's a mentally a finished product. Right now, I don't think he is that, and I don't think that cost him here on Saturday. But I think it is one of those things where, at short prices, because he's going to be a short price wherever he shows up again, until he proves to me that he is fully there. I'm not saying I won't pick him in his next race, wherever that may be, but I'm always going to be a little bit, I'm going to approach him with trepidation until he goes out there and runs a complete race. And I'm just not sure that he's done that just yet. Jovia and Tax, I think they both ran brave races. I think they both took advantage of the inside situation and the speed. Look, speed's never a bad thing on dirt, and that's another piece that I've always sort of harped on when we talk about biases and things of that nature. Being forward on dirt is not a bad place to be. It's where you want to be. And in a race like this where the fractions, they heated up going into that far turn, perhaps that worked against those two, but they both ran really nice races. I think they're honest horses. I don't know that they're the best of the best. I don't know that they're the cream of the crop for this 3-year-old group, even though to me this 3-year-old group at this point, and I've said a number of times before, it is way too early to make definitive statements. Really, we'll only know what these horses are probably a year from now, or a year and a half or 2 years from now, when we can look back and see what they all turned into, what they blossomed into. As things are sort of constituted right now, I think it's a deep group. I don't know how deep the sort of quality is, but I think there's just a whole mess of horses in sort of that pecking order of they're fine. I don't think any are superstars at this moment right now. Someone could certainly develop into one. Maybe it's Sir Winston. Maybe it's Tacitus. Maybe it's Jovia or Tax. Who knows? I don't think any of them are just complete no-hopers, but it feels like you have a number of horses that fit in sort of the same, they all live in the same area code. And an area code is very wide. It's not a zip code. If there's only a couple of really talented ones that are in the same zip code, that's fine. If they're all living in the same area code, I feel like there's still an opportunity for a fresh face, a horse that perhaps we've never even heard of, or a horse that's sidelined or something like that, to come back and really assert themselves as the leader of this division. Master Fencer, he rode that inside sort of bias until the far turn. Leparoux tipped him out. He was very wide, turning for home. He never changed leads, but he finished well. A little bit of an optical illusion both ways. He did finish well. I don't want to take anything away from him there. But, at a mile and a half, you're going to start passing some tired horses as well. The horse is better than I had given him credit for all Triple Crown season. Again, don't think he's a superstar. Be curious to see what they do with him. I assume he goes back to Japan and starts to run in some of their races on dirt. But Master Fencer, it's always nice when you get a little bit of international intrigue in any of our biggest races. Spinoff, I think he has ability. I think he's talented. I think shorter is going to be better for him. Everfast, he rode the rail again. Things worked out beautifully for him. He just seemed kind of even, and he still needs to prove that Preakness was not an aberration, was actually what he is. He had all things go his way in the Belmont, and he just didn't really finish with them. Intrepid Heart, I never thought he did any real running. I thought this was a really, really poor performance from him. War of Will. He was in rounding the far turn, he looked like he was moving well enough. When the real running began, he had nothing. He was completely empty. You can sit there and say being as far outside as he was didn't work, especially given that you wanted to be inside. You can say maybe he should have been a little bit closer, but again, those interior splits according to time form, the pace heated up. I'm not going to blame Gaffalione. I'm not going to blame Mark Casse either. For one reason or another, it just wasn't a good race for More of Will. This one, to me, this is his first really poor effort on dirt, because I think he's had excuses for those two other poor efforts. The Louisiana Derby, he got injured. The Kentucky Derby, we all know what happened. This, to me, is the really first just sort of dud from him, and maybe it was one of those things where maybe that third race in 5 weeks just took its toll, and it finally kind of reared its head, and he maybe he just needed a little bit of a breather, needs a little bit of a break. I still think the horse has immense ability. I still think he's one of the best 3-year-olds that there is. I just, for whatever reason, this was not a good performance from him, and I don't think there's really a way to sugarcoat it. He just didn't run. A poor effort from War of Will. You assume, or I assume anyway, that he will rebound wherever he should show up next. And Bourbon Ward, the last horse that we'll touch on here, he never picked his feet up either. I continue to say, if it's not this race, down the road over the summer. Said it coming out of the Preakness. Said it going into the Belmont. I thought he'd do a hell of a lot better than run last and never look like he even belonged on the racetrack. We're starting to have a little bit of a, the sample size is too small to really say that, it's time to really consider major changes here. But boy, if for some reason, let's say I'm just throwing hypotheticals out there, if the Connections wanted to run him in a race like the Jim Dandy and he came back with another just complete bomb, then I think you look at his pedigree and you know his dam did some good things on alternative surfaces. Maybe you have to start exploring that, because this is 2 consecutive efforts where he was just dreadful. He never picked his feet up. Maybe I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. I still think there might be something here. I think there's ability, but based on these last 2 races, it just doesn't look like he belongs, at least with this caliber of horse at this point. We'll button things up with the Belmont, just discussing the 3-year-old division in general. It feels, I've already kind of tipped my hand speaking about it a little bit earlier, the idea that it feels like a division ripe for the taking. And maybe it's as simple as maximum security. Maybe it's as simple as when he returns, he is going to continue to prove on that, no one has passed the wire. No one has finished ahead of me in a real race. No one has actually hit the wire before I have. Sure, the numbers and the record may not say that, but to date, no one has finished ahead of him in a race. And maybe it's just going to continue on that trend going forward. Maybe it'll be a horse like Omaha Beach when he comes back from his surgery and he gets back on the beam. He'll be good to go. Maybe it's a horse like Game Winner for Baffert, who will come back in just tremendous form. But this 3-year-old group right now, it doesn't feel like... If you told me that I needed to make a vote for 3-year-old champion right now, I don't know that I could. I don't know that I would. This is one of those instances where what are you going to do? Just pick your poison? I don't know. I mean, I don't think any of them are necessarily deserving of it at this point. Perhaps it would be Maximum Security, which sounds a little bit wild because he didn't win any of the Triple Crown races, didn't win any of them. But, just strictly from a talent standpoint, I think the case can be made that he's the best horse and he's done everything that's been asked of him. The good news is, and in years like this where there's so many people saying, the group is no good, and blah, 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 whatever it is, the good news is when you have a division like this through the Triple Crown season, it just ensures that they're all going to be around going through the summer and into the fall, because all those races are going to mean that much more. The Travers is going to be a giant race this year. The Haskell is going to be massive. And I understand, say what you will about the timing, and as we get later on in the year, it's another 3-year-old restricted race, but that Pennsylvania Derby has become a very, very key race. Not just for 3-year-olds, but for divisional honors overall. I think it's going to be really, really fascinating to see how this entire division shakes down going forward. Right now, feels a little bit muddy, but there's time for them to all sort themselves out. And again, time for fresh faces even to pop into this thing and say, I'm here. Maybe this is a year like an Arrowgate year, where he comes just absolutely out of nowhere and says, I'm boss, you're all running for second or third. Sir Winston. Great job from Mark Casse. Beautiful ride from Joel Rosario. A good effort all around from the Connections involved. A 95 buyer and a 119 time form U.S. rating. He is your 2019 Belmont Stakes winner.